welcome to another edition of Ruins of Empire with your host, Rafael Pinheiro. Tonight we're going to be discussing an interesting issue concerning storytelling and video games. A year ago or so, I played two games, Mass Effect 3 and Far Cry 3. And I'm not going to rehash the whole ending mess with Mass Effect 3, but suffice to say that the common talking point in defense of the ending was that that was the story that the developers wanted to tell. And there are many ways to answer that. Well, they told it wrong. It's irrelevant to the quality of the ending of the game, and so on and so forth. But still, it is a factual statement. It is something that is true. It seems to be that that was the story they wanted to tell, good, bad, or indifferent. And it still bothered me, but I couldn't pin it down what about the statement bothered me. Then I played Far Cry 3. And it's very interesting because I first rented the game and I played about 10 to 15 hours worth of the game. And then later on I bought the game and played the whole game. My first impression was a very positive one. I liked the free roaming, I liked the sandbox elements. The story elements seemed to be very interesting. The characters seemed to be very interesting. It seemed a game right up my alley. But then when I played it, I encountered something that I call the prisoner plot dilemma. The seemingly only way that they could move the story forward seemed to taking the main character, Brody, captured. They would capture him, or they would disable him in some way, or they would drug him, and that was a way. Then of course you have a cutscene where the story was delivered onto you, to the player. Usually Vaz Montenegro or another character would just deliver their lines, and then you would move forward, right? And it kind of reminded me of Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, which is another great sandbox game, but it had that penchant of using the prisoner plot dilemma to move the story forward, right? And the thing about the prisoner plot dilemma is that, again, you're disabled in some way. Your weapons, your abilities, even your movement are suspended until the game tells you what the story is, or delivers the latest plot point, and then moves on. And I found that to be troubling, and that's when it hit me. The problem was that they were trying very, very hard to tell a story, right? And every time they did that, they messed with the flow of the game. They suspended player agency, which lies at the heart of what I call the central tenet of video games, which is the illusion of control. Which is an illusion because, of course, you're working within program parameters, but the idea that you're in control. And player agency is basically the totality of all your control inputs, your decisions, your strategy, etc. And the more player agency you have, the stronger the illusion of control. The less agency you have, the tendency to have the illusion is weakened, or it can even be shattered altogether. And when you try to do storytelling in video games, by necessity, you have to suspend or minimalize this illusion of control. You have to take the agency out of the player's hand. You have to sort of force, metaphorically, even literally, the player to put down the controller or have their hands away from the controls, right? From the keyboard and mouse. And why do I say that? Well, let's look at this very simple exercise. 2 sentences. The first sentence is the player plays the game, right? The subject is a player. He acts, and his action is to play, and he acts upon the game, which is the object. Subject, actor, action, subject, object, receival of the action. Someone who is a recipient of the action. Somebody who's acted upon. Now, when you're storytelling, it's different. The storyteller tells a tale or story. Or a storyteller tells a story to an audience. There is a storyteller who's doing the action, right? and he or she or they are acting upon the audience through the means of storytelling. And that's fine if you're doing a movie or a television show, which are what are called passive visual media. There's an expectation that you will simply sit there and watch and listen to what is being presented to you. But in video games, again, the central tenet is this illusion of control, which is based on player agency, which in turn is based on the fact that video games are interactive, right? And not simply just, the game doesn't simply ask you to politely push a button once in a while. The game actually demands your participation. Failure to participate means failing to successfully finish and complete the goals the game assigns to you, and it means literally mission failed, end of the game, right? That's why, that's the point where success and failure states come in, right? Your failure state is a failure of the player to do what they are supposed to do, right, and accomplish their goals, right? There can be hard failure states, soft failure states, and also the same thing goes with success states. What is a win condition? What's a loss condition? What is a win condition? But when you try to storytell, like just examples of those sentences I gave you, there is an expectation, right? An expectation that you are an audience member and you have to sit back and just absorb what has been given to you. And that creates a clash between two actors. One of them, the player, the other one, in this case, the developer. Now, you're probably thinking about it right now, okay, fine, I get what you're trying to say. You're the kind of guy who doesn't like story in video games, right? You want to go back to the days of Pong and Pac-Man and stuff like that, when it was, very arcadey, very uncomplicated things. You love to run around in multiplayer, death matches where you're just shooting at other people, and you're not really concerned about story. But we, people might be saying this, we like story, we like characters, we like deep plots. You can't, if you don't have any storytelling, you don't have any story. Well, that's not true at all. I would say that as part of this concept, storytelling is the act of telling story, but it's not the same thing as a story. Okay, fine. Then what? Well, here's the thing. If you come to the game development table, if you will, and say, I want to tell a story, what you're doing, or the mindset you're bringing to the process is, I'm going to use an interactive elements of the game, and I'm going to subliminate them and enslave them, really, to the non-interactive elements. And that is, I think, lies at the core of what has been called ludonarrative dissonance. The clash between the ludo aspects, the movement, the action, we'll say by the player, and the narrative element of a game. They don't seem to match. Sometimes you can do things in a cutscene that you're not allowed to do in gameplay, but most of the time, like in the Prisoner's Pod Dilemma, your ability, say, able to shoot someone in the face or something, is suspended because the story demands that someone be able to deliver the story and not be interrupted, right? You're not allowed to maneuver outside the line, stuff like that. Now, mind you, that doesn't mean that if that happens, immediately it's not a game, right? There's more to it than that. And the more linear the game, again, the more likely you're going to have relatively more narrow choices or selection of choices, and your agency and therefore your illusion of control can be minimized in certain things, maybe less than. But that doesn't mean it's not a game, right? Another thing that one must consider is that you can have a perfectly good game without any story, or without any story elements. Or you can have a game that emphasizes some story elements, but doesn't have a coherent or complete narrative behind it, right? Or as a foundation. It doesn't use a complete narrative. For example, fighting games are big on characters. They're all about the character roster and, and their abilities and their, costumes and all that. But the setting, usually just a series of backdrops, interesting backdrops, but just, regular backdrops, to have something that the player can see differently and sort of give flavor to the action, and frame the action. And, the plot usually is an excuse plot, right? But I wouldn't say, nobody would say, oh, fighting games are not real games, right? They are games. They're just games that, when it comes to narrative elements, emphasize character and put very little stock on plot or setting, right? On the other hand, you can have a game like, say, Skyrim and Bethesda type sandbox games. They're big on setting. The DC Wasteland, Skyrim, anywhere in the Elder Scrolls, they put a lot of effort in crafting, interesting settings, with a lot of locations in them, a lot of lore, a lot of history, some place you can inhabit and play into. Characters, well, usually most of the characters are your run-of-the-mill characters, your quest givers, that sort of thing. And the plot might be there, but usually it's very easy to ignore the plot or simply go your own way and then go back to the plot whenever you want to, because it's a sandbox, right? There's a tendency to try to maximize player agency and therefore create a very strong sense of being in control. The illusion of control is very strong in these games, or at least stronger than more linear games. And this is tendency with all sandbox games. But they suffer perhaps because they don't have a lot of plot, and therefore they don't seem to have a very solid structure, right? Where more linear games seems to have a very particular structure you can follow, right? And it takes you from one point to the next. So you have those examples, right? But let's say that you say, you know what, I'm going to make a great AAA game. It's going to have a very interesting story. I get the fact that I'm not going to tell you a story, but I still want to use a story, right? I want the story to be an essential part of the game design, right? I'm going to follow your advice, and I'm going to, in this video, and I'm going to just say, okay, fine, I'm going to use the story as a game design element. Well, you have to understand what each of the three narrative elements brings to the table, and what happens when you put them all together, and what that also brings to the table to make a better game. The first one, let's start with setting. Setting is simple. Setting is the time and place of events, where the events take place. Like I said before, in a game like Skyrim, it's all about the setting, right? The skyboxes, the grand vistas, the creatures who inhabit this world and all that, the rules of magic and what have you. And that setting basically is all about two things. Lore, that is a sense of history, a sense that this place has a sense of, being a solid place, has a history before the player came into the world. It is concurrent with the player's actions and life in the world, and that it will continue after the player is done, right? It gives a sense of being a very solid place, right? And that helps into something that is particularly unique to video games, which is not found in other medium, and that is the idea of immersion, right? You immerse. You don't simply play a game. Some games actually allow you to immerse yourself, and the highly immersive games are those who emphasize this sense of a very solid, very strong, very surreal or real setting, right? A place and time and place of the action takes place. And, or should I say, it's a time and place of the story in this case. But there's another aspect of it as well, is called world building. And that is setting up the rules for the world. And here is where narrative can really match what's the game and the game mechanics, and really help to support the game mechanics. Because often you have game mechanics that have little or no relation to the narrative, because as part of, there was little or no effective world building was made. And what is world building? Well, setting the rules basically of your universe, of your setting. Why and how of, say, faster than light travel, or the magic system, or the crafting system, or the economic system, the politics. Those things exist, and they set a set of rules that may not track with reality. We don't go around fighting dragons. As of yet, nobody has discovered how to travel faster than light or teleport to places. There's, now experimenting with energy weapons. Nobody carries around laser rifles as of yet. So there are limitations to what you can do. But by presenting a set of coherent and consistent rules as part of your world building, it is much easier not only to suspend your disbelief, at least on the part of the player, but again, it helps in immersion, because it says, oh, these are the rules. These are recognizable rules that will follow and have a sense of consistency, just like in the real world, right? Looks like you have gravity, right? There are rules and laws to this world as they are in the real world. They may have nothing to do with the real world, right? But in the space of the game, in the environment of the game, they have a certain consistency, right? The other aspect of this, of course, is plot. And plot is very tricky. Here is where things go sideways, right? Because in the storyteller's mind, the idea of the game is to deliver the plot and deliver the plot point, which are the sequence of events, right? And often, the stronger the storytelling mindset is, the more likely that they will try to make everything about these plot points and make sure the plot points happen in a certain way, right? So you're going to have a lot of cutscenes where characters come in and deliver plot points. You're going to have characters, especially villains, who are immune to damage until such time as the game allows you. And so they'll make a lot of appearances, but they'll do it in a cutscene, or they'll arrive in a cutscene, or escape in a cutscene, or defeat the player in a cutscene, or what have you. Right? Or you have QTEs where you're allowed to do something, right? But what you can do is very minimal. Going back to the example of Far Cry 3, you had a situation where the bosses were defeated by QTE, right? You could only engage certain bosses in a very specific way, right? And there was no strategy to it, really. It was just get to the point, do the thing, press the buttons in the right order, and you win, right? If you don't do it, you lose. Sometimes the situations were extremely absurd, but because you have this storytelling mindset, it's like, well, this is follows the rules of cool. This is something we need to see, and so we cannot have the player pull a gun or a large knife or a rocket launcher, just blast the bad guy and be done with it, or run away, or something like that. We have to have it in such a way that it has to be through a cutscene or QTE. And again, the player agency is minimized or suspended just to deliver the plot, right? Just to deliver the story. The game designer said, no, I'm going to use story to improve my game. We'll think of plot in a different way. They'll think plot is the sequence of events, right? And they'll use plot to give a sense of structure to the game, right? Think of it, instead of being, a railway or rail line that you have to follow, right, as you play along, it's more like the outer barriers of a highway. You can change lanes, you can speed up, you can go faster, slow. You can turn around if you have a chance and go back the other direction. You can go to the shoulder and stop. You can listen to music while you're on the highway. But there's a certain structure to the highway, and if you go too far to one side or the other, there's going to be consequences, right? And there's a lot of tricks with it, not only narrative tricks to it, but also gameplay elements to it as well. Beef gates and chest-high walls and what have you, to keep the player within the confines. But using plot to sort of define the confines and give a certain level of structure to the game allows for the player to really get into it and not have to worry about having to do a lot of the, having to follow their own structure, unless you're more sandboxing. But if your game is not a big sandbox, then you can rely more on plot to really put the player in a general course, in a general direction you want them to, but without being too constricting or suffocating, right? Another aspect of it is the plot tends to give the reason why is the hero or the main character do what they're doing, right? It sets up the precedence of the actions. Like, well, you're here because there's a great evil that's going to destroy the galaxy. Okay, fine. Well, I'm the hero who has to stop them, right? Or you lost the throne to the evil vizier, right? And you have to get it back. Or you're a criminal mastermind who's coming from the dregs and now it's going to create a criminal empire. And the premise serves as a launching point for the plot. And as the plot goes along, the player becomes invested in the plot and wants to know what happens next. Not only that, they want to see the effects of their actions, and counteractions. How the actions and reactions shape the game, right? And the game reacts to them. And that's an aspect that plot has to incorporate a reactive sense. That there's a give and take between the player and the game itself. Often when, again, you go back to the storytelling mentality, it doesn't matter what the player does, because all that matters is the story that needs to be delivered, right? And therefore, if it's done wrong, you end up with a situation like I did. It was like, almost like, why am I playing this game, right? It seems these things are going to happen no matter what. I mean, things can happen outside of the player's control, of course. It gets a certain sense of being in a world that is alive, right? Not everything has to be under the control of the player. But when the player spends minutes, hours playing, and all of a sudden everything that they've done gets reversed constantly, or they get pigeonholed in a recurring situation because the plot demands it, then, it can go to a point where it becomes tiresome, right? And finally, you have the characters. The characters are very interesting because the characters, I call them the point of contact. They put a face to the setting and to the plot. They're also emotional anchors, right? Often people are attracted to a game because of the premise or premises, but they stay or they dig deeper if they have a sense that their characters here they want to relate to. BioWare does this a lot with their characters, but other games, other companies like Ubisoft, of course, attempt to do it as well. And good characters are characters you want to adventure with, you want to help out, or you want to defeat, right? Good characters put not only a face to events in the plot, who's the villain and their motivations and all that, but they populate the setting. They bring that city, that wasteland, that space station, that galaxy alive, right? There are people who are there, they're doing their things, and people you can interact with and care about, right? It's not simply saving the city. You want to save the city because the city is full of people that, should not die, right? You want to help your friends with their, tasks because they're your friends, right? You're invested in what they do. And a good character will reciprocate that sense. Again, it creates emotional connections to the action beyond, I don't want to fail this, or I want to win the game, right? And that brings us to what a complete narrative brings to a game that has it, rather than one that does not. If you choose to go the route of having a complete narrative, a strong setting, a simple but supple and plot, and interesting characters, you will probably achieve what is called narrative depth. And narrative depth is very simple. It's that sense that there's more to it than just what you're seeing. More to it than just the music, more than just the color palette, more than just, running around and killing stuff. It's a sense that there's more, that this environment that you're playing in is alive, right? And thriving, and a place you want to be there and perhaps revisit over time, right? And what's interesting is narrative that doesn't come from having lots of plot points, right? It doesn't necessarily come from having a huge, expansive setting, very complex setting with lots of lore, lots of history, in-game history. It doesn't come from having a gigantic cast of thousands or millions. It comes from the layering of these elements, how the setting interacts with the plot and interacts with the characters. For example, characters will have subplots of their own, which are woven into the main plot. They have their own reasons why they are, they're opposed to your actions, or they are willing to help you out, right? But also they give a face to and a voice to the setting. They tend to represent the moral and economic and social aspects of the setting. They can be for monarchy or against it. They can be for a political action or against it. They can have different views on, say, drug use in this world, right? Or the use of cybernetics or what have you, right? And interesting characters, multidimensional characters, three-dimensional characters, when put in an interesting, simple but interesting plot and put to populate a solid setting, create the sense of narrative depth. And that is then used as a base where you perch your game on top. You put your gameplay, you sort of fit it in just like a pyramid, like the building blocks of a pyramid. You fit them together, and you end up elevating your entire game, your entire structure, beyond just shooting people on the face or running around getting loot, or jumping from one platform to the next. Not to say that those things are not fun, but if you're going to make the investment in narrative, and the narrative turns to be a strong, solid narrative, the end result is going to have a memorable game, because it will have all those things that are support of course, good gameplay elements. Hopefully, your gameplay elements will be good and consistent, and they will be backed by the lore, and they'll be backed by the world building. They will help the character overcome the obstacles that the plot presents them, and navigate the plot, and of course will allow them to interact with characters that they find interesting and want to either side with or defeat or anywhere in between, right? At least care about, right, what happens with these characters. So if you are seeking to have story in your game, forget the idea of storytelling. It is, in fact, fundamentally incompatible with video games. Remember that video games are an interactive medium, and storytelling demands a passive audience, not an active player. Remember that you don't have to have a story, but if you choose to have a story, you can either have elements of a story in the game, or you can go full hog, if you will, and have everything. But a well-written story in support of the gameplay will make the whole thing better. Now, this is one thing I do agree with many people who propose storytelling, and that is that you have to make story an integral part of the game design, right? My take on this is more of a paradigm. How do you approach the game design process, as opposed to saying yay or nay? Either you have a story, or you don't have a story. That's not what I'm advocating at all. You have to have the story, the writers, the voice actors, the directors, and all that be part of the game design throughout, right? In order to make sure that your story fits what you're trying to do in the game, and in fact make for a better game, they have to be participants of the process throughout, right? And sadly, many times what happens is that you can have a great story, but usually it's the first thing that gets cut, right? Side quests get cut, side characters get cut, lines of dialogue get cut, and then you end up with a situation that the game, through their game mechanics, suggests should happen, but there's no story to back it up, right? So that's all I wanted to say on this subject. There will be more videos on this. In fact, I suspect that the next video will be answering some of the reasons why people use the term storytelling, and again, why I don't agree with them. And also, this also goes into the idea of exactly what is a game, right? Because if you have storytelling, and there's some products out there who emphasize storytelling, are they really games, right? If they minimize the illusion of control to the point that it becomes something else, are they still games? And what is the future of story in video games? We're talking about that in further videos, in newer videos after this one. I just hope that this was both entertaining and you managed to follow along my logic. And as always, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you when I see you. Good night.